Uh, Hello. Thanks so much for coming. My name's Ayla. I'm a game designer. I make small, little, colorful, pixely, arcadey, retro-y games. I've done a lot of work on fantasy consoles. And today I'm going to be talking about game feel. So probably a sane way to start is we should define game feel. I'm not going to do that. Turns out it's just a trap. It's really hard to do. No one can define game feel. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump right into an example. We're going to try to get kind of a shared understanding of what game feel sort of is. And that'll be good enough for me. So here's a game I made. You are a little bat. There's a little baseball going at you. And if you press the space bar, you swing the baseball. And then you can hit the baseball. And that, it's a game. But I think even without playing it, you can get some understanding that it doesn't really feel that good to play. I have this understanding of how baseball and a bat should interact, and this just isn't really fulfilling that understanding. So it turns out there's a bunch of techniques in the game design world for improving this a little bit. So we could add some screen shakes so that when you hit the ball, it rattles the screen a little bit to kind of simulate that feeling of like you hit something. We could add some freeze frames so that when you hit that ball, it stops for a second so you can really see the impact. And we can do a bunch of things like that. And now, game's a lot faster, and like when we hit that ball, yeah, there's a little bit of punch to that. And so now we're getting into that space where like, ooh, this kind of feels like I'm actually like knocking something out of the park. And this is called Juice, and it's going to be the first way that I'll recommend to improve the feel of your game. You can juice your game to kind of like increase the elasticity of it, increase the dynamism of it, like make it, just get those, this is the crunchy boomy bits of like whatever's crunchy, make it 10 times more crunchy. And this also gets at something where we have a virtual world with virtual objects, and we have kind of like our personal understanding of like how physical objects in the physical world interact. And we're trying to like, to some extent, bring the virtual world in alignment with how we expect physical objects to behave. But since it's Juice, it's also like, do that, but also exaggerate it. So also like, we're in a video game, why are we hitting one ball? Let's just hit 20 at a time, it's a video game. So that's kind of the philosophy of like, give it a little bit of physicality and then just run with it, go to 11. So that's I think the most prototypical example of game feel, but I want to go a little bit further. Let's do something that's a little bit more contentious. So imagine you had one of those turn-based, battle-y kind of games like Final Fantasy where you attack each other and then, maybe you miss, and it's like, well. And in this case, I'm saying that this character has a 50% chance to hit, and I missed an attack, and that's fair. I had an equal chance of hitting as I did to miss, so fair enough. But if I were to then miss 5 more times in a row, like to me, that's not just like, I'm unlucky. That's, this game's broken and I'm going to set it down and never play it again. And this gets at a really interesting aspect of the human brain where if you ask like a human to mentally flip coins in their head, generally what they'll do is they'll do a head and then a tails and then a head and then a tails and then maybe 2 heads in a row, getting a little risky, but then do 2 tails in a row later just to like close it off a little bit. But it turns out the way actual probability works out is you get a lot of streaks. Like it's pretty common to get 5, 6, 7 heads or tails in a row. And it's funny just that the human brain, like we have these concepts of like lucky and unlucky to sort of explain these things that are just like purely normal things to happen. But to our human brains, it's like, there has to be something going on here. So what we can do in our game is if actual probability and statistics feels a little bit bad to our brains, we can have it so that whenever I miss an attack, it can increase the chance to hit with the next attack. And if I miss again, it increases it further until finally, maybe the chance is so high that I finally actually hit. And then we can reset back down to that base level. And the effect of this essentially is we're getting rid of streaks that the human brain feel too long. We're kind of like matching the human brain's conception of how probability works. And I think this is really interesting because before, we're talking about virtual objects, physical objects, and we're trying to bring the virtual objects up to the standards we know in the physical world. Now it's sort of like we have actual perfect probability that computers are good at and really dumb bad probability of our brains, and we're trying to just bring the computer down to our level. And to the human brain, that just feels like, yeah, that's what randomness is. So another way to improve game feel, bad math. Stop using real math, don't use real statistics, use bad math. It feels a little bit better to us. And this is kind of building into that knowledge of like, oh, that's what game feel is it just feels naturally, connects with what we know in our brains. But we've gone through something that's practical and juice, that's like widely accepted as like, that's good game feel stuff, at least right now. And this example here, it's not everyone would call it game feel, but I feel like it is. But this is bang bang con, so I want to go a step further. Let's do something that is absolutely useless, but sort of fun to do. So I have here a platformer I built. You can kind of walk around and jump, and you can collect gems and stuff. And actually how it works under the covers in every game is when I press that jump button, there's actually a little bit of input latency. So when I press the jump button, there's actually fractions of seconds that in between when I press the button and when the character on screen actually jumps, and that's input latency. And we can actually simulate what it would be like if there was more input latency. Let's crank it up to 30 frames of input latency, which is a full half a second. And now when I press the jump button, you can see that there's actually a delay between when I press that button and when the character actually jumps. And if we reset this here, if I were to play a game at 30 frames of input latency, you probably can't quite feel this the way I can, but I can tell you it feels really bad to play. It feels like I'm playing through a sponge. It feels sort of like I'm not controlling the character, I'm just like making suggestions to them, and they're like, oh yeah, I guess I'll jump. And if I reset it back down to 0, it's like, oh, fine, like, okay, now I can actually move my character around again and do things that I want to do. So we just had it where I press the jump button, and it causes my character in the future to jump. And that's the input latency. It was a full half a second in the future that my character actually jumped after I pressed the button. And we can all agree that felt bad. I mean, you don't know, but you trust me, and I can tell you it feels pretty bad. So, and then I changed it back so that when you press the jump button, it causes your character to jump in the present. And that was when there were 0 frames of input latency. And we can all agree, again, through trust, that felt actually a lot better. That felt good. And you might be able to see where I'm going with this. What if we had it so that when I pressed that jump button, it made my character jump in the past? And if we did that, would that feel even better? So we can't quite do this, but we can sort of do this. So this is my character's normal jump, and then I can add -5 frames of input latency. And now you can see when I jump, it sort of skips up to midair, and if I do like -10 frames of input latency, you can see it kind of just skips into being in midair. And I hope, let's warp our brains a little bit. What's happening is when I press the jump button, it means that the game's time traveling to the past and saying, the jump button, we jump now, and then in the present, we come back to the present, and the character's already in midair. So every time I jump now, I'm actually jumping 10 frames in the past. And the same thing happens with moving. Whenever I press the right button, it means my character started moving right 10 frames in the past. And whenever I let go of the right button, it means they stop moving to the right 10 frames in the past. And if we crank it up to 30, so it's a full half a second, now we're at the point where it's looking good. Now we're at the point where I can move to the right and collect some gems and then uncollect them. Because what's happening is I'm moving to the right and collecting the gem, and then I'm releasing the right button, and then it goes back in time and says, no, they stopped moving. They never actually reached the gem. And then if we crank it up to a full -2 of input latency, we're at the point where when I press the jump button, the character doesn't actually move at all to us. And that's because the character's full jump arc is all in the past. They started jumping a second ago, they finished jumping a second ago. And now we get this really, now we got some weird stuff going on. Looking good. And so the question is, does this feel like exponentially better than 0 input latency? And the answer is no. It feels quite bad, actually. But it was fun. So ways to improve game feel, time travel? No, don't do that. That's actually not a very good way to do it. Just try to get to low latency. So those are the 3 points I want to go through today, but to give you some context, this game, this slide deck itself is actually a game, because I would prefer to make a game rather than make a slide deck at this point. And it's built in a framework called Castle, which I'm working on with a bunch of cool folks. It's this cool app for making games, playing games, sharing games. And game feel is something that's probably best experienced for yourself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some stations out there with these examples on it. You can try them out yourself. See if you think that negative latency is maybe feel good. Try out some juice. But that's all I want to talk about today. So thanks so much.